The story begins with a beautiful woman. She is the best Chinese translator in Korea. And just at that time, she was in an important summit where practically everything depended on her. But in the middle of all that, her uncle, Jung Bae, calls her and tells her that she finally found that person she had been looking for more than 10 years. She runs out and doesn't mind leaving everything behind. To find out who is the person she is looking for, we have to go back 30 years in the past. Now we meet Park Do-seok. He is the toughest debt collector. When someone doesn't want to pay, they send him because there is no debt he can't collect. His partner named Jung Bae served with him in the army, and that's why he always calls him Sergeant. One day, they were to collect a debt from a woman who had not paid for more than 2 months. She is Mrs. Myung, who upon recognizing them tries to run away, but Sergeant Shuk manages to catch her and tells her that he will not leave without paying her debt. She tells him that she has no money at the moment and that she will pay him all next month. Sergeant Seok does not agree, and that's why he is not able to collect the debt. That's why he is sent to the army, and that's why he always calls him Sergeant. The girl pinches him and he tries to give her a slap, but the lady gets in the way and it looks like she hit him. She takes advantage of this to ask for help and tries to make a big fuss, but Sergeant Seok doesn't want any trouble, so he tells her that he will leave, but he will take a guarantee. He takes the girl and tells her that tomorrow morning he has to give her the money. The girl cries because he had practically kidnapped her. Sergeant Seok buys her food and toys, but still, the girl does not stop crying. Now we find out that the girl's father did not want to take care of her and that Mrs. Myung was an illegal immigrant from China. That is why she cannot denounce him, so she has no choice but to call her last option, an old man who lends her money in exchange for giving up children for adoption to supposedly rich families. When she gets the money, she calls Sergeant Seok to tell him that she will pay him back tomorrow. But in the middle of the night, 2 policemen arrive because it turns out that the father of her daughter had reported her. And since she was an illegal immigrant, she would soon be deported. The next day, they take her to the loan office. The boss was furious because instead of bringing him the money, they had kidnapped a girl. Sergeant Seok says that it is not a kidnapping, but that they took her as a guarantee. And with that, they would get the money, but Mrs. Myung never arrived because she was already locked up. Later, they want to go look for her, and they ask Seung-yi where she lives, but she doesn't want to say anything. When the traffic light is red, she takes advantage and runs away from the loan sharks. She's very fast and manages to lose them, but Sergeant Seok doesn't want to give up, because if they don't collect on that debt, they won't make money for the next 3 months. Now, we see that Seung-yi comes home and finds the cops looking for her. But again, she managed to hide very well. When she gets home, she remembers the moments with her mother. This makes her miss her, and she knows something bad happened to her. Otherwise, she would have come back to rescue her by now. The next day, Sergeant Seok is called to the immigration offices. Mrs. Myung had sent for him when he finds her. She tells him that he must take care of the girl until a man comes to pick her up and pay the debt. Apparently, she was going to give her up for adoption, since it was the only option she had so that the girl would not be deported. He is upset, but still accepts. Mrs. Myung thanks him and asks him not to tell the truth to her daughter. At home, the little girl had gotten ready to go out to look for her mother. She walked and walked for hours until it got dark and still could not find her mother. While returning home, she passes by a dangerous neighborhood, and a homeless man tries to kidnap her. But luckily, at that moment, Sergeant Seok arrives and manages to save her. She's still scared. She asks him if her mother really abandoned her. The sergeant tells her that her mother did not abandon her, but that she went far away to earn money, and that she should live with him for a few days until her uncle comes to pick her up and take her to her mother. She became sad and kept crying, but after a few days, she became a very polite girl. She cleaned Sergeant Seok's house and waited patiently for her uncle to come and pick her up, to take her to her mother. Every day, she asked him if her mother would really come to pick her up when he took her to her uncle, and Sergeant Seok always said yes. That's why she acted like a good girl. Then she finally received the confirmation from Uncle Choi, who said that he would pay her 750,000 won debt and give her extra money for the days she was with them. So she asked him to take her to the city and give her a little ride so that he could pick her up later. On the way to the city center, the girl starts to play with the names because in Korea, every name has a meaning, and Uncle Seok's name was a stonehead, but he doesn't like that meaning. So Seung-yi gives him a new name and names him Park Sung-bo, which means more or less what is the winning boss, although he ends up liking it. When they arrived at the mall, they went to buy clothes for the girl, and Young-bae wanted to buy everything she tried on. But since it was too expensive, they went to the sales area where she got into a fight with a lady over a dress. When the night came, they took her to eat ice cream, and she took advantage of the fact that Uncle Seok was in a good mood to tell him that his favorite idol was going to give a concert, and it was at 7 p.m., and since it was his last day together, he decided to take her to see his favorite singer. But he didn't buy her a ticket. He smuggled her in while the guard was distracted. At the end of the concert, he bought her a CD and an autographed poster, although that ended up costing him his emergency money. Afterwards, she thanks him, and he happily tells her that he can't hug all the men who give him something because they are all dogs except him. When they get home, they throw her a little farewell party, but Seung-yi was sad because she had grown fond of Uncle Seok, and Jung-bae, they had also grown fond of her, but they couldn't keep the girl. The next day, they had arranged very well to give her to her uncle, but before he arrives, Uncle Seok had bought her a CD player to listen to the music of her favorite idol. Then, her supposed uncle arrives, but the girl does not seem to recognize him, and he did not even know his name. It turns out that this gentleman would only give her up for adoption with a supposed rich family. Before leaving, Uncle Seok gives her the picture of her mother and tells her that she can call him when she is in trouble. Sometime later, Uncle Seok was very depressed and couldn't even work, so he sent a message to Seung-yi using the name she had given him. But days went by and she didn't answer. So he called the old man's house, but his wife told him that he wasn't home and that sometimes he wouldn't be back for another year. When he heard this, he decided to start searching like crazy, but everyone told him that this person does not exist. Finally, he managed to find him and threatened him to tell him where the girl is. He replied that he did not put her up for adoption, but rather that he sold her and he does not even know where she was taken. When he found out about this, he beat him savagely. Now, we see Seung-yi. She was with a very noisy woman and she was practically a slave. She took out the garbage, cleaned the bathrooms, and also the lobby. It turns out that she had bought a woman who worked in a nightclub called Cha-Cha-Cha. One of those days while working, Seung-yi takes the phone and leaves a message to her mother. She asks how she is and if she will really come to look for her. But to her good luck, Uncle Seok finds her pager and sees the message she had left. Then, he also leaves her a message and tells her to call him, but he gives her wrong number and she can't reach him. Later, she has to clean up the mess that a drunk customer had caused. The drunk throws a glass, and the glass cuts Seung-yi's face. But the lady, instead of taking her to the doctor, just takes out the piece of glass and puts a bandage on her. Later, she finds another phone and sends a message to Uncle Seok, and this time, he gives her his number and she can finally call him. She tells him to pick her up and that she is at a nightclub. Uncle Seok gets very upset and tells her to wait for her there because he is on his way. When they arrive, Seung-yi was waiting for him, and as the place was closed, he breaks the glass to save her. Then the lady comes out and Uncle Seok confronts her for not taking her to the hospital when she got hurt. He also tells her that he will pay her all the money he paid for her, and on top of that, he will pay for the repair of the door. On the way home, he tells her that she can be calm because now she is safe. The next day, Uncle Seok sells his car to pay the debt to the lady at the club, then takes the girl to the hospital to have her wound checked. And since it is a big wound, he is told that it would be better to take her to a plastic surgeon so that she will not have a scar in the future. And although he had no money, Uncle Seok pays for the surgery so that Seung-yi can have a peaceful life. The only viable solution is for Uncle Seok to adopt her. But she doesn't want to at first because she thinks it would be like giving up her mother. But then Jung-bo explained to her that in reality, Uncle Seok would not be her father. She only had to pretend to be his daughter and study hard so that society would accept him. And in the future, she could be reunited with her mother. This is how they managed to convince her. And the next day, she started her first day of school. Uncle Seok had volunteered to guide the children on the first day, and as time went on, he learned to cook, and Seung-yi became the best student in the school. He had really become a father to her, and so they went on with their lives. After many years, her mother came back to see her, but when she saw how happy they were, she regretted talking to them and preferred to keep things as they were, so she went on with her life. A long time later, Seung-yi entered the university in one of the best positions, and one of those many days, she had her first blind date, and when Uncle Seok wanted to go out to look for her, she arrived at his door with a man and said she wanted to marry him. When they questioned him, it turned out that he was a nice guy who would soon graduate from medical school and was from a good family, and this was also her first blind date. Later, Mrs. Myung's mother, Seung-yi's grandmother, called her. Uncle Seok doesn't tell her anything until he arrives in China and tells her that her mother is very sick and she shouldn't hold a grudge because it will only end up hurting her. When he sees her, she immediately forgives her, and after many years, they finally meet again. Later, she thanks Uncle Seok for taking such good care of her daughter. She also confesses that years ago, she went to look for her, but when she saw how happy they were, she didn't dare to talk to them. In the evening, Seung-yi's mother was so sick that she couldn't even eat. Before leaving, she asked him for one last favor. She wanted Seung-yi to meet his father, so she asked Uncle Seok to help her with that. When they arrived in Korea, he had set out to look for Seung-yi's biological father. For her part, she had seen how worn out his shoes were, so she went to work to buy him a pair without telling Uncle Seok anything, because it was supposed to be a surprise. After a while, she managed to raise the money for Uncle Seok's shoes, and he had managed to find his biological father. But he already had a family. He still wanted Seung-yi to meet him. When he gets home, he calls her to ask her to go see him, but she didn't know what it was all about. Then Uncle Seok starts drinking with Jung-bae, and he complains to him for looking for Seung-yi's biological father, because now he should be the one to walk her down the aisle when she gets married. This makes Uncle Seok sad. But he feels at peace because he fulfilled Mrs. Myung's last wish. Then, Seung-yi, and calls him and no longer calls him uncle, but for the first time, he calls him dad. He is very excited and starts crying because she really is his daughter. Then she asks him to pick her up. He accepts and excitedly goes to pick up his daughter and takes with him the CD player that he had bought her many years ago. Apparently, she had kept it all this time, but before arriving, his eyesight becomes blurry, and he suffers a terrible accident. Apparently, Uncle Seung-yi suffered from some head disease. That's why he could never get to pick up his daughter. And after that day, they never saw him again. Seung-yi searched for more than 10 years, and there was no trace of him. He had even formed a foundation for missing persons in the hope of finding him someday. Jung-bae asked him to give up, but Seung-yi is not one of those people who abandon their loved ones. And one of those days, when it seemed that they had failed again, she realized that they had been looking for him under the wrong name all this time, because Uncle Seok had lost his memory, and the only name he remembered was the one his daughter had given him, and that's how they managed to find him. It turns out that he was sick, but he never treated his illness. And as he was a stubborn man, he thought he would heal later, but that never happened. Now he does not recognize anyone, and he is as if he was a vegetable. But when she says his name, he repeats it and gives her the gift he had bought her many years ago. All this time, he had been saving the CD player he had bought the girl more than 30 years ago. Then his daughter can finally give him the shoes he had bought her. She apologizes for being late and promises him that she will never leave him alone again. In the final scene, we see that the word guarantee has a double meaning. It is something that over time grows and blooms to become a great treasure. And that is how this story ends. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to not miss any summary. See you in the next story.